what I'd like to talk about very quickly, as we already know, we're all facing crises, but the biggest crisis that is really overwhelming on all of it is science has recognized we are now deep into the 6th mass extinction of life on this planet. 5 times in the history of this planet, life was thriving and then got wiped out. The previous 5 are due to things like asteroids, comets hitting the planet, destroying the environment, and wiping out life. Science has recognized that the mass extinction that we currently face right now is due to human behavior. So we're creating our own mass extinction. But what's really important about human behavior is where do we get our behaviors from? Where do we get our culture from? Well, in every civilization, we have a different source of truth. In the current civilization, our source of truth is science. We say if it's scientific, oh, that's really important. If it's not scientific, it's questionable. Well, here's the issue. There are several fundamental scientific beliefs that have shaped this culture that have now found to have been actually wrong and outright wrong. And they're very significant. 2 of them I just mentioned is number 1, that we used to think we were controlled by genes, which that meant we were victims of our heredity. The new science is called epigenetics and says, no, you control your genes with your consciousness and your life experiences. So that means we are masters because we can change our experiences and our consciousness and therefore change our genetics. The other very important, interesting part is that we have separated the material world from the spiritual world, and now the new science is really coming back in and saying, yes, the spiritual world is really there, and people are beginning to wake up to the reality there is more to our life than the physical plane. And when these 2 fundamental beliefs come in, it's so self-empowering that this is going to change civilization profoundly. The third belief that I really want to talk about right now is the belief that we share in the understanding of evolution. And the belief that we're really basing ourselves on is the Darwinian evolution theory. It's not that evolution didn't occur. Evolution occurred, but not according to the mechanism of Charles Darwin. And the significance of Charles Darwin's story is actually in the title of his own book. While everybody's familiar with the title of The Origin of Species by Natural Selection, most people are not familiar with the subtitle, which is what the editor put in the book to sell it to the world, and it was the reason why it became a global success within 10 years. The subtitle of the book is called The Preservation of the Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. And the relevance about that is it really leads us to the understanding of the 2 fundamental characteristics of Darwinian theory. Number 1, hereditary changes or accidents or random mutation, meaning where's the next level of evolution? And you really can't say if you start off with the first premise that it's all by accident. So we're all facing this uncertain future where evolution is. But secondarily, and the most disastrous part of this theory that is just destroying the world is the second part, which is called natural selection, which is based on a competition for survival. So it really says we emphasize the individual and that we don't care about the rest of it. If you win, you won the game, and it doesn't make a difference if all the other people are dying out there. If you're the winner, and that's just the nature of the game. So we bought into the fact that life is a struggle for survival. The hell with everybody else, take care of yourself. And so we bought into this. And then they built a tree of evolution. It starts from the most primitive organisms, bacterium, and goes up to, if you want to suggest that humans are the top, that's possible. But it's an increasing scale of consciousness and nervous system awareness from the lowest to the highest. Now, the basis of this, if you put it into Darwinian theory, the basis of it is due to genetics. So we talk about the concept that genes, through evolution, have become more complex, and as you go up the evolutionary scale, you can measure complexity and evolution through genetic readout. And this is what led us to do the Human Genome Project in part, because all of our characteristics are apparently connected to the genes, and if we understand the nature of all the genes, then we will understand how humans work, how to fix them, change them, whatever you want. And the significance is, so we get into the Human Genome Project. I'd like to just review a little bit of genomes right here. I got in my palm of my hand right here 3 organisms. There's a hardly visible little organism called Superorganism. The name is a lot larger than this little tiny worm. The second one is the familiar fruit fly. And the third one is Homo sapiens, and this is Homo sapiens brucei. And what's significant about it is what did we find out from the Genome Project? Number 1, we find that Superorganism elegans, which only has 1,271 cells, has a total number of about 20,000 genes. And we go, wow. So then the more complex fruit fly, which is profoundly much more complex, should have profoundly more genes. And we say, how many genes in the fruit fly? And it's got 14,000 genes. So all of a sudden you say, well, wait a minute, the complexity in no way matches the genetic readout. And then I said, well, what about humans with 50 trillion cells? How many genes do we have? 23,000 genes. So basically we have 3,000 genes more than the most primitive organisms really on the planet. So the concept of trying to measure evolution through genetics is a total false misunderstanding. The whole thing was wrong, and that's not where evolution comes from. Genes are not self-actualizing, meaning genes, as you've been told, turn on and off. It's a total false understanding. Genes have no control over their readout or their expression. Genes are controlled by environmental signals. And the new science is not genetic control, it's called epigenetic control. And if you don't know it, it's the most important revolution in science in the world for this very important reason. Genetic control simply means control by genes, victimization, since you didn't, as we know, or as far as we know, pick the genes we came with. We can't change the genes, and if genes control you, you're a victim of genetic control. The new science sounds almost the same, epigenetic control, but it's profoundly different because the prefix epi means above. So when I say epigenetic control, it simply says control above the genes. Well, what is that? Well, I said it's environmental signals. I was working on cloning stem cells 45 years ago. There was a handful of us in the world that even knew what the hell a stem cell was. And what I found out in my research is that by changing the environment of the cell, I changed the genetic readout of genetically identical cells. So I have 3 petri dishes, genetically identical cells, change the environment in each of the dishes. One dish they form muscle, one dish they form bone, one dish they form fat cells. But the most important understanding was this: what controlled the fate of the cells? And the answer is not the genes. It was the environment in which the genes come. That led me to go say, well, how does a signal from the environment ultimately control genetics? Well, basically what that led me to was an understanding of the nature of cells is that signals from the environment, so if I have these cells in my petri dish, I add chemistry to the dish, the signals that I'm adding come down upon the cells. Some of the signals from the environment stick to the surface of the cell, the membrane. And the significance about that is the membrane then mediates the transfer of the signals into the cell. So the membrane will then relay the signal into the proteins which control behavior. So the environment controls behavior via the membrane. And also signals can be transferred into the nucleus, where the signals then control the genetic activity. So the basic thing is this: environment is where the signals come from, the source, the destination of the proteins and the genes, but the interface is the membrane. The membrane controls the signals. So in truth, the brain of the cell is the membrane. And it's not anything to do with the genes. The genes are the gonads of the cell. And the significance, of course, is science is a male-dominated profession. And since they apparently think with that organ, it became the brain of the cell, the nucleus, but it's just reproduction. So the understanding of this said, well, wait, if the brain of the cell is the skin of the cell, and just by the sidebar, your nervous system comes from your skin, so you and the cell are parallel images to each other. And so the significance about the skin was this: when I started to do the insight to understanding how this works, I was beginning to be involved with what is now one of the leading edges of science. It's called signal transduction, which means the mechanisms and processes of how an environmental signal controls biology. But there's a special subdivision of signal transduction, and that subdivision is when the signal sends the information to the nucleus and controls genetics. As I mentioned, the name of that is epigenetics. Okay? So basically I was looking at the mechanism of how this is controlled, and as I said, the brain is now called the membrane, and the skin of the cell. And I say, well, what's in the skin of the cell that does this control? So I'm going to give you an example of what is a switch. This is a switch that interacts between an environmental signal and a control function inside your biology. There's 2 main proteins. One's called a receptor, the other is called an effector. You have receptors in your skin which control your biology because you pick up all the information: eyes, ears, nose, taste, and touch. There are about 100,000 of these switches in the surface of any conventional amoeba-like cell. And I say, well, how does it work? And the answer is simply this, that the receptor receives a stimulus, the effector, it creates a response. So all of biology is stimulus response to environmental signals. I say, well, that's really cool. Signal comes in, I connect the receptor to the effector so that the environmental signal that's coming in, oops, go back, sorry about that. Okay, well, you saw it anyway, right? The environmental signal is picked up by the receptor, it couples with the effector then sends a physical signal in, and that's what controls the behavior and the genetics. So you look at this switch, receptor, effector, I say, what's the name of the switch? And I give you science's term, which is in Latin, of course, because that prevents you from understanding what the switch is. And so I just give the name of the switch. In science, it's a receptor, effector, integral membrane protein complex. And everybody goes, great, like this. But here's what's so important about it. Let me define the switch in words that you know. And so I define the function of the switch. I say, what's the function of your receptors? Eyes, ears, nose, taste. What's the function of your receptors? Awareness of, please come, I said 100,000 per cell. Awareness of the environment, function of the receptor. I say, what's the function of the effector? That sends a physical signal or physical sensation into the cell to control the function. So I define the switch for you very simply. I say, what's the name of the switch? Well, it is awareness of the environment through physical sensation. And I say, well, what does that mean to you? And I go to the dictionary, and there's the word, perception. Perception, awareness of the elements of environment through physical sensation. The switches in the cell membrane are perceptions. Perception controls biology. That the number of perception units you have is related to the intelligence of the system. More perception, more intelligence. So all of a sudden it says, oh, so if you can put lots of perception units in a membrane, then you can have a very intelligent cell. So here's the one problem, and I just want to tell you about, I just want to bring this up. Perception is belief, because not all of our perceptions are accurate. So it's your belief that controls your biology, because if you have an incorrect belief, it'll control it just as much as a correct belief, and usually to the detriment of your life when you have an incorrect perception. So basically now we have the nature of consciousness is built into the actions of perceptions. Primitive organisms have perceptions. As you go up, more perceptions, more awareness, and more consciousness, okay? So here's the limitation. It's a schematic diagram of a cell membrane. The thickness of the membrane is a fixed dimension. You say, so what? And I say, because the protein switches are of a fixed dimension. And when you put the proteins into the membrane, they can't stack on top of each other. And you say, well, what the hell is all you talking about here, Lipton? And then what I'm telling you is this. The protein switches can only form a monolayer in the membrane. Meaning, if you want more switches, you have to have more surface area. It's not you can build them up. They take a unit of surface area. So now, guess what? Perception is now physically mediated by a unit of surface. The more surface area you have, the more intelligence you can process. Simple point. Well, why is that relevant? Because then I go back and I say you get to a simple bacterial size organism, and it's the smallest organism on the planet. It's the first organism on the planet. And the significance about it is this. Bacteria are in capsules. They're like invertebrates. They have a shell around them. Point, they can only have a certain amount of membrane. That's all they can have. Why? You can't make it any bigger than that. So guess what? Evolution first phase was to make the bacteria. Then there was 1 billion years of bacteria trying to improve the mechanism, but it got to a limitation. Why? You can't make any more membrane in a bacterium. So that meant evolution stopped. It actually stopped. Why? If I'm going to make evolution by increasing membrane and I can't make any more membrane, then it stopped. So this is not part of our vision of evolution. I said, well, what happened next? I say, amoebas joined together in communities, put themselves in a bigger membrane, and that led to the evolution of the human cell, which is an amoeba in its origins, okay? Why is it relevant? There's the membrane surface of a bacterium, and then when you look at the membrane surface of a human cell, thousands of times more surface area. I say, well, why is this relevant? Let's go to the evolution. I say, Darwinian theory tells us this. Evolution started with a primitive organism, a bacterium, and then through random mutations and accidents and natural selection, we go up the evolutionary scale in one continuous, very slow, gradual process that has taken about 3.5 billion years. And I say this is the failure of our understanding because of the Darwinian theory says, hey, what's the next step on there? And the answer is, it's random, so how the hell I know what the next step is? Nobody will know. And it's all one continuous process, and it turns out totally wrong. Why? Evolution took jumps. First bacteria, and they reached a maximum. Then they joined into a community to make amoebas. But guess what? Another 2 billion years of amoebas improving their life and making the best amoeba possible led to what? A limitation. Why? Very simply, a cell is like a water balloon, okay? You can only fill it up with so much cytoplasm, and then the membrane breaks. Well, if the membrane breaks, the cell dies. But a cell can't get too big because the membrane isn't strong enough. So, point, just as bacteria reached a limit of membrane, conventional amoebas reached a limit of membrane. And what happened? Evolution stopped again. I say, yeah, but what happened? I say, well, what happened the first time in evolution? When it stopped, how did you get more intelligence? You put single units together in a community and they share the intelligence. I say, okay, that was a bacteria going to an amoeba, and now I say it stops. I say, what do you do next? 500 million years ago, the amoeba said, okay, maximize our individual intelligence. The next level is what? Communities of amoebas. And then you look at yourself in the mirror and you say, look, I'm a human being. And I go, yes, you are a human being, but you're not a single organism. By definition, you are a community of 50 trillion amoebas. You are made out of amoebas. Amoebas are the living organism. You, by definition, are a community. You are not a single entity. You are made out of 50 trillion sentient, intelligent amoebas who come together to share their membrane awareness to make that unit. So I say, well, how's the evolutionary plan? It's not Darwinian at all. And it goes like this. Organism A starts, bacterium, for example. What does it do for the next period of billion years? It proliferates, maximizes its capability as a single organism. Then what does it do? The bacteria come together and they form simple colonies. Now I say, yeah, but then what do? They form integrated colonies, which are actually called biofilms. And that is the precursor of an amoeba, because a biofilm is a community of bacteria living under one membrane, and a diverse community of bacteria at that, sharing a workload. I say, well then, what did the biofilm become? I said, the next organism B. And I said, what does organism B do? Well, now that's a community of organism A, and what does it do? Exact same thing, goes through the same cycle, tries to maximize its individual intelligence, forms a simple colonies, integrated colonies, and then forms organism C, and guess what? It's a spiral. And you've looked at the spiral. I say, well, let's go back over very quickly. So I say, when we look at the spiral, are you going to go? Yeah, there you go. I say, organism A, we said, was a bacterium. I said, what does it do? It proliferates and makes a colony of bacteria. Then I say, what does that do? Well, that forms a biofilm where they all get together and control their world by putting a membrane around it so they can control their world and the vagaries of what's going on in the environment. And I said, what did that do? They evolved to a differentiated community, which is called the amoeba. And I said, what did the amoeba do? So that starts to go together and goes to the next level, which becomes the human, which is a multicellular community. I said, well, we look at the spiral this way, and I go, that's really interesting, but if you look at the spiral from the side, it looks this way. Why is this relevant? Every rung of the spiral is a jump in an evolutionary awareness by the mechanism of community. Every turn of the spiral is the evolution of the individuals that ultimately create the community. So the first rung of the ladder was the bacterium. Then communities of bacteria came and formed amoebas. And then amoebas came together, and 50 trillion of them formed us. And guess what? We maximized in the 500 million years the conscious capability and mental capabilities of our nervous system. And then guess what? We maximize our intelligence. I say, yeah, then what when the human maximizes intelligence? Oh, it comes together in simple communities. Then it comes together in integrated communities. And then when it finally completes the next rung of the ladder, it organizes itself in a multicellular community called humanity. We are on the verge of trying to understand the simple reality of where are we going in our evolution. The answer is this: we are here at the turning point. We're at the turning point whether we decide as humans we want to make the superorganism called humanity, or we just want to let the thing die out because we've reached the end of, and what we need is the awareness and consciousness and the massive intelligence that when you get 7 billion humans to come together in one organism, with that maximum intelligence, there's going to be an emergence of new consciousness, a new awareness of nothing that you can tell me today what's going to happen tomorrow. But I can tell you this: it will not happen until this event happens. And what we're seeing now is the breakdown of the structure, which is inevitably being connected by the global nervous system called the internet, which will hook 7 billion cells together to share their awareness, share their understanding of their superorganism character, and that we're moving into the next state. And it's completely not Darwinian at all. It's the complete opposite, because finally they're beginning to recognize it's the cooperation that drives evolution, not the competition. The competition has been destructive. We've proven that, and we're now moving up to the next level of the rung, and that is we're going in this direction. Anything that encourages cooperation and community is the next step in our evolution. And as I said, where will that take us? And the answer is this: ask an amoeba, you think, hey, how about taking a rocket to the moon? And the amoeba is thinking, how about some food? And the idea about that is why? Because it took 50 trillion amoebas to come together to even conceive the idea of going to the moon. It was not in the intelligence of any amoeba. And I say, well, what happens when 7 billion people come together? And the answer is, it's emergent. We don't know, but it'll be beyond anything you could ever imagine at this point. And we are on the threshold, but we're actually at the fork in the road. We either go ahead and move into the community, or as science has already told us, we are deep into the 6th mass extinction, and if we just play the game out, game's over. So there's not an unknown future in front of us. Evolution has already told us where we're going. Now what we have to do is, how can we coordinate 7 billion people to live in harmony and work together to create the superorganism, humanity, because that's our destiny. Thank you very much. Thank you.